to welcome all of our panelists. First up, we have Dan Ebert, partner at Five Lights Energy. Dan, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what Five Lights does?
Sure, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay with this mic? Great. So yes, I joined Five Lakes Energy last year after 15 years on my own consulting. And really excited about this partnership because Five Lakes brings some really deep technical expertise to these policy questions. And they've got a 15-year history in Michigan, and excited about bringing some of those skills and experiences here. Before that, I was at WPPI Energy for about 6 years, and prior to that, I was at the Public Service Commission for another 6 years. So good to be here. Sam, this is a great event. I love starting off the year with the Renew Summit. It really seems to kick off the year the right way, and I love the theme of collaboration because I think that's really going to be essential this year. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Dan. Second, we have Krista Westerberg. Krista is a partner at Pinesbach. Krista, do you mind briefly telling us about your work at Pinesbach and yourself?
Sure, thanks, Sam. So I'm a partner at Pinesbach. I've been there since 2016. I've been in private practice in the Madison area since 2002. And a large part of my practice is land use, environmental, and energy law. And in particular, the last three-ish years or so, I've been active in representing community groups at the Public Service Commission, particularly in rate cases. And so again, another great convergence with the theme of the conference and collaboration. That's what these groups are all about, and building community.
Thanks, Krista. Mm-hmm. Last but certainly not least, we have Sarah Moon, co-founder and principal at Fieldworks Power. Sarah, do you mind introducing yourself and giving us a little look into Fieldworks?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me here today. And like my other panelists mentioned, I think the theme is just spot on for all the exciting things that we have ahead in Wisconsin this year. But Fieldworks Power, we're a community solar developer. We're a small group of developers and really focused on bringing community solar to states where it doesn't exist yet. So Wisconsin is top of our list. We're working on just a few states in the Midwest and trying to create an opportunity and a market for people to benefit from all the great things that community solar has to offer, which I'll talk about later today. But I've worked in community solar for a long time, all elements of the community solar marketplace, from subscribing customers and signing up and figuring out how to improve access to low-income subscribers, to running a community solar development, sort of arm at a large IPP, and now I branch out on my own. So great to be here and excited to talk about community solar today.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, let's get into it. Dan, first off, there's a lot of energy stories in the news lately. We've heard a lot more energy is coming. We know we need to transition to renewables really quick. How do we kind of get this right from a holistic view?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's, as I was thinking about this panel, it struck me that there's some parallels to when I first started at the commission, so 2003, 2004. The grid and the industry was going through significant change. There were some really big challenges facing the state. I remember in my first 3 years at the commission, every summer, we were sort of on the edge of whether the lights were going to stay on or not. Brownouts, threats of blackouts. The state had to respond, and we did by some significant investments. About $7 billion. These are rough numbers, and if ATC's here, they'll correct me on the exact number. New transmission. As Sam said, there's some really big projects coming at us, so that will grow. Probably another $4, $5, $6 billion, and again, our utility friends will correct me, in new investments in generating electricity. We had to respond. And fast forward to today, similar, lots of change happening. The grid is changing around us. We're excited about all the new technologies, Tom. All of, Sam, your company's products and services from renewable energy to software to demand response, really exciting opportunities. But the biggest threat facing the industry today is really the emergence of data centers and their extraordinary energy needs. And let me just say at the beginning, I think everybody in this room can agree, we love the economic development opportunity for Wisconsin, right? This is an extraordinary opportunity for Wisconsin, not only the construction jobs and the near-term economic impacts, which are going to be significant, but also the long-term opportunity to create different career paths for my daughter, who's 16, sort of thinking about what she's going to be doing 10 years from now and 20 years from now. So this is a really exciting opportunity, and we are all for it. But the energy challenges are really extraordinary. I went back and looked at the commission, the Public Service Commission's strategic energy, it's their last one, not their current one. And they predicted in that report that the load growth in the state of Wisconsin from 2022 to 2028 would be less than 1%. And that is sort of traditional. It's sort of how Wisconsin has been. Very slow, modest growth that allows us and gives us opportunity to be thoughtful about how we're going to change our energy infrastructure. There's a lot of rumors and a lot of new announcements. The one announcement that we know for sure is Microsoft. When you think about the Microsoft announcement and the rumors that we're hearing, it's not impossible in the next 2 to 3 years, 4 years, for Wisconsin to see a 10% increase in energy needs. That is breathtaking. From an industry where you plan for 25 and 30 years and you are thoughtful and incremental, that is really extraordinary change. That's going to require us to think differently and, importantly, for the commission to have different tools than they have today to be able to meet this challenge.
Sarah, we have clearly, a lot of large-scale investments, coal plants, gas plants, solar and wind plants now as well. We also have, rooftop solar and some smaller distributed energy sources. But there's a pretty big gap in between there. Tell us how we need to fill that gap if we really want to not only meet reliability needs, but also transition to clean energy.
Yeah, I like to think of community solar as sort of the Goldilocks solution in between rooftop and utility scale. And you need all of the above, to meet the needs that Dan is describing. I think that is truly astounding to think about a 10% load growth and how much is going to need to come online. And so I think if we're not tapping into the innovative solution of community solar, which, to take a step back, we're talking about 1 to 5 megawatt scale projects here that really fit in neatly within a community. So these can be housed on a corporate rooftop like a Walmart rooftop, or they can be housed on top of a capped landfill. Or they can be, situated on a farmer's back 40 and give sort of the income that Invenergy's presentation was talking about, maybe to some smaller scale farmers, who are trying to continue to farm around and make ends meet, when times are tough. And so I think community solar really is an important piece of the solution that isn't really, to your point, Sam, being tapped into in Wisconsin today. I mean, some of the example projects that you talked about are great examples of what community solar could look like in so many of the communities across the state. The important thing about community solar is while it's tapping into the existing distribution infrastructure, and taking advantage of capacity that's there to bring new generation on without having to build out new transmission lines, which are going to be very busy occupying the significant load growth needs that Dan talked about. You also have the idea behind community solar, and the opportunity that's in front of the legislature today is to create a third-party owned community solar program. And that would create a ton of scale and leverage private capital to build these projects and bring these projects online. And then in addition to, kind of this no regrets, quick deployment solution and fitting these projects in places that they're not fitting in, and truly community solar, I've seen it in other states, can add a lot of scale across, a large number of projects, especially when you unleash the potential of private capital. These projects also save people money. And they're meant to give people a choice and a say and a little bit of freedom in where their energy is coming from for those people that can't afford to do rooftop solar today. So I really think that community solar is an important solution that Wisconsin needs to think about. And like we talked about earlier, we're already thinking about it, right? We got 2 hearings on our community solar legislation last session, and it's a solution that is something that people across both sides of the aisle are thinking about, which is really exciting.
Thanks, Sarah. Krista, we've talked about large utility-owned energy generation. We talked about rooftop solar. We talked about the gaps that need to be filled in. What's getting left behind, or maybe more importantly, who is getting left behind here?
Right, thanks. So from what I have seen and what we've been focusing on at the Commission of late is residential ratepayers, and in particular, low-income residential ratepayers who are suffering high energy burdens, which is defined as more than 6% of their income devoted to paying for utilities, as well as, and then I think the severe level is considered 10%. So this group of ratepayers has been hit with multiple rate increases in the last couple of years. In the immediate aftermath of COVID, there had been some deferred increases, and then combine that with high inflation and paying for some of the utility scale projects. This has all led to extremely high rate increases for residential ratepayers, some of whom cannot afford to pay for them, and for whom existing programs to help with rate pay with energy bills like LIHEAP, they're just limited, and they don't do enough, and they don't go far enough. Another option for this group of ratepayers is to reduce their bills through reduced consumption through access to renewables. But that's something that's really difficult for a lot of these ratepayers to do because, for example, if they live in multifamily, they don't control the rooftop, they don't control the appliances, they don't have the ability to change their situation in a way that would allow them to reduce their consumption either through efficiency or renewables. The other issue is that they can't, in some cases, afford the upfront costs of renewables or even appliances, even with rebates and other programs that are available. And that's unfortunate because in some cases they are paying for these programs already. They're paying for Focus on Energy, for example, through their rates. And yet they don't have the ability to fully access those programs the same as, for example, single-family homeowners. So that group is getting sort of the worst of all possible worlds, higher rates, and then the least ability to do anything about it.
So I want to focus on some solutions here. I want to take my own advice from a few minutes ago when I said we should focus on the positives. Krista, how can we help lower the rates of energy burden folks? How can renewables help? How can we incorporate more renewables in helping these folks out?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, and I'll leave it to the panel to talk about third-party solar. That's been implemented to some extent in a very limited capacity for residential ratepayers. Alliant has a couple of projects, but for the most part, that is not something that's been available to residential ratepayers so far because of the utilities don't view them as cost-effective, those programs as cost-effective for residential ratepayers. Another option is that is to share the meter. So if you live in multifamily, if everybody has to get their own meter, it makes it much more difficult for people to use renewables because, again, they don't control the rooftop. But if everybody in a multifamily unit is sharing a meter and the owner of the building can put solar on top, then everybody in the building could share the benefits of that. this has come up a little bit at the commission in the form of, then this was referred to before in the overview, the year in review about multifamily metering waiver applications that have come to the commission. And what that refers to is, under current rules, buildings that were constructed in 1980 or after have to have individual meters installed in each multifamily unit, meters that are owned by the utility. But and also buildings that have been refurbished or being refurbished or undergo substantial changes and get converted to multifamily. Like right now we're seeing this with a lot of hotel projects. Those also need to install an individual meter that is owned by the utility, according to some of the decisions that have come from the commission lately. And that has some downsides. One, again, is it lowers the access to renewables and the ability of people in the building to lower their bills because they're getting their energy from the sun or not from the utility. But it also increased the costs of housing. And that's a real problem in today's housing crisis. If every individual unit has to be outfitted and the building has to be refurbished in such a way that requires every unit to have its own meter, then it just makes it more expensive for the tenant, and it makes it harder to access renewables. So there are some waivers in the past that have been granted, and there will be more in the future. So that is another pathway to increasing access to renewables for this low-income population in particular that's been left behind in large part today.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So we heard some solutions in the micro scale. Dan, I want to zoom out to the macro. How we talked about all of this, all this load growth that's coming online, and how do we plan for this so we don't just build another giant gas plant?
Yeah, thanks. I think just a little bit of context before I get into the answer. I described earlier the significant build that we did in the early and mid 2000s to respond to the reliability challenge. I think it's fair for us to admit that we made some mistakes, that planning process was not sufficient, and that as a result of that, ratepayers in the state are paying for those mistakes in increased cost. Almost, actually in excess of $1 billion are being recovered in rates right now to pay for those mistakes. I think it's incumbent on all of us to say, we didn't do great, we can do better. And the way that we do better is we move to a planning process to give the commission an actual planning process that allows them to consider all of the above. Everybody loves to say, we're all for all of the above, except some people, when they say that, they mean fossil fuel and nuclear. And sometimes when people say that, they mean only renewables. The time has come for us to really have an all of the above strategy. And the only way we can get that is by having an integrated resource planning process. What does an IRP do? It puts the commission in a position to evaluate all solutions. We just heard some exciting new developments around community solar. We're going to hear later today about virtual power plants. There are places in this country where virtual power plants are part of the solution, and they can be part of the solution here. They're not today. But what an IRP does is it says utilities are required to do a plan, submit that plan to the commission for review. That plan needs to look at what are the needs, where is the load growth going, and then put together a plan that includes supply side solutions, which is new generation, can be renewable, can be fossil, but that is an important part of the equation, but also what's called the demand side. And those are tools like energy efficiency, like demand response, like customer-cited solutions. We have extraordinary opportunities to push the envelope to lower our overall energy use. And this is true for residential, commercial, and industrial customers. But if we don't put in place a plan that really does protect all of the above, we're going to be making similar mistakes. The one thing that scares me even more today than it did 20 years ago is the speed and the size of this change coming at us. So if we get it wrong, the decisions we're making, it's funny, I just got to digress a little bit, Sam. In the last 3 weeks, I have watched with great interest all of the news about data centers. So we had the new president, standing up with 3 companies that said $500 billion in new data centers we're going to be investing. And then afterwards it's like, well, we really have $100 billion now, but we're going to make those kinds of investments. Microsoft has announced $88 billion of new data center investments throughout the state. $3.3 billion is in Wisconsin. Amazon, Meta, everybody's coming out and saying, we're getting into this game. The one thing I think we can learn over the last 20 years is that we're in a bubble. Everybody's chasing, and they're going to change. But the problem is we need to make decisions that are going to last for 20 or 25 years. So the risks, if we don't do this the right way, are far greater today than they were 20 years ago.
So I want to ask one quick follow-up question,
Yeah.
if I may. A lot of folks would say, well, we already have a strategic energy assessment. What would you say to those folks?
What I would say is our strategic energy assessment is a tool, but it's not good enough. Because that strategic energy assessment was in place during all of those builds that led us to the point now, just in the last 2 years, $1 billion of additional costs from our mistakes. And there's more on the horizon. So that's not sufficient. We know that for sure. I think we can all agree that's not sufficient. And we can join 98% of the other regulated states have what is a full, complete, integrated resource planning process. And it's time for Wisconsin to put one in place.
I want to move over to Sarah. How can community solar help a state like Wisconsin? I mean, I know these, Dan, these problems are certainly not exclusive to our state, right? I'm sure. Tell us a little bit more about how community solar has helped other states with these same problems. So we can't be the only state that's going to be doing community solar, right?
No, definitely not. Wisconsin would be, I would say, middle of the pack in terms of states across the country that have embraced community solar. So 20 or so states have already embraced community solar, are reaping the benefits of bringing the solution to their states. Private, developers are building these projects without risk. If we overspend or it doesn't quite go as planned to the ratepayers. That falls solely on the developer. And these projects upgrade the grid as they go. So that's also money that the ratepayers don't have to pay to bolster lines, all the way from where the project is located back to the substation to serve the local community. So I think there's a lot of benefits associated with community solar access. I mean, people in these states who can't install rooftop solar on their roofs are able to choose clean energy if they want to, choose savings, and participate in that without having to do any kind of physical installation on their property. Those folks that live in condos or multifamily or anything like that, it's a tool that's available to folks to expand access. And we're talking about big problems here, so I don't want to, come up here and say I'm like a community solar fangirl, and community solar is going to solve. Ooh, exciting! I wish I had something dramatic to say after that. Community solar is. Community solar is just one piece of the solution, and I do think it's an important one, but these are big problems. I think what I do really like about community solar, and I think what we've seen in the other states that have embraced it, is that it's quick. Once you unlock this marketplace and enable, this solution through policy, these products can come online in a year. It doesn't take 5 years, like some new utility scale projects that take a lot of planning that are really important, but just a different solution. It doesn't take a decade like nuclear. So while the state is thinking thoughtfully about how are we going to tackle these problems without putting undue cost burden on everyone who's paying for the solutions, community solar can be something that you can deploy now. That's clean, that's rapid. I think of it as sort of a no regrets solution of a piece of the puzzle to add in that creates a lot of value right away.
All right. $1 million question time.
Okay.
This session is called New Maps, New Possibilities, clean energy legislation this year. So I'm going to ask it. What are the possibilities? I'm going to stick with you, Sarah. Community solar has interest from both Democrats and Republicans, not just in Wisconsin, but all over. Can it pass here in Wisconsin?
I think so. I'm choosing to embrace positivity this year, like you, Sam. So we're really hopeful. I mean, I think the fact that we got hearings in both chambers last year, I think was a really significant signal that this policy is being considered seriously. I think, like you said, there's a lot of interest on both sides of the aisle for a lot of the same reasons and for different reasons. I think Republicans really appreciate, and not to put everyone in a box, but just to be general here, really appreciate the economic opportunity for farmers. And the competitive element here, the sort of adding of competition and innovation and seeing what that can do for the electricity market and for these problems that we're talking about. They also embrace energy freedom and having the choice to choose and have a little bit of say and where you go, and having these independent developers like me compete for people's interest. These projects don't get built and don't happen unless there's subscribers on the other side who want to participate in it. I think Democrats are excited for a lot of the same reasons, but they see this as an opportunity to expand access, like we talked about. It's clean power, right? So I think it really is a bipartisan solution. We've seen that in a lot of other states. And I think there's a lot of acute interest right now because of the sort of changing landscape under our feet with data centers to look at, with an even closer look, more innovative solutions. The other thing I think that's kind of reaching a boiling point, which is why I hope that this year is the year, is we have a really amazing group of stakeholders who all want to see this happen. It's not just developers, who want to see this brought to market. It's groups like Renew, right, who are tirelessly advocating for a cleaner, more accessible solution for folks in the state. Walmart wants to see this happen because they want to lower energy prices for all of their customers, and they know that their roofs are sitting idle and are a great location to site these. The Farm Bureau, because of the access and opportunity this provides to farmers on a smaller scale, right? A farmer can put this on their sandy back 40, get income that supplements their livelihood. So I could go on and on about, the opportunity. There's jobs, economic development opportunities. I think people are finally picking their heads up and seeing that this is that nice sort of no regrets puzzle piece. So anyway, I'm manifesting that this passes this year. If anyone's interested, I would love to talk to you about, creative ways to make that happen, but let's hope.
So Krista, I want to move over. I know you're not a lobbyist, but I definitely want to ask you, legislative fixes to some of the issues you were talking about. These seem like more progressive issues, but why should everyone be concerned about things like energy burden?
Yeah. Well, first of all, energy burden is everywhere. It's not confined to one part of the state. So there are people who with high energy burdens, probably in every county in Wisconsin. And so that's sort of reason number one, is that it affects a lot of people. And it affects a lot of people across a broad geographic area, although, certainly there's some some urban areas have more concentrated populations. But the other reason is that this would actually help reduce costs for everybody. If we can help people lower their bills, and not fall into arrears and not get disconnected and bring higher costs to the system that way. That should keep costs down for everybody. And I don't know if everyone appreciates that when people can't pay their bills, it's not that the utility doesn't get that money. It just means those arrears are rolled into the next rate case and then distributed across all the ratepayers. And this is not a little bit of money, it's tens of millions of dollars in some cases. So for people who say, oh, programs that reduce, help with energy burden, whether they be programs that reduce rates through like a percentage of income payment program or a different kind of program, you're still paying under the status quo. And we might as well do it in a thoughtful way, in a way that we can deal with it up front. We can do some more planning around it, and this, is better for the consumer too, who doesn't fall into bankruptcy or have some other issue because they're behind on their bills. The last thing I would say is, the multifamily metering solution. That one actually I think is more cost neutral, period, because if a building that is being refurbished from, say, a hotel to a multifamily apartment building is not required to install a meter in every unit that is owned by the utility, then you're saving money. You're just keeping the status quo, the meter that's on the building. And so that's a solution that, again, like third-party solar could be implemented relatively rapidly.
And last but not least, Dan, is this the time for more holistic planning in Wisconsin?
Well, I'll leave it to the legislative experts to answer that question. But what I will say is that I think if you look at the last 30 years in the state, anytime we've been faced by a significant challenge in the utility space, in energy, bipartisan consensus has emerged. And we have done things. We created the American Transmission Company. I sat across the table from Scott Jensen and Phil Montgomery and negotiated siting reform for transmission. It is possible, and I would urge this crowd and folks outside of this room to think about the challenges facing us as rising to the level of we need a solution. And I agree with some of the earlier comments. The world is different today than it was 2 years ago. I mean, we have new companies interested in this state, Microsoft, Google, Meta, blah, blah, blah. They all have very strong opinions on this topic. And as large energy customers in the state, they're going to want to make sure the state is making the right plans. And Sam, I think, Renew and the growth of Renew over the last several years, and if you look at the diversity of companies that are your members, this is about economic development in Wisconsin. People want to look at the construction jobs, which are true, and we support those, but there's also economic development in the jobs that are being created by the businesses that belong to Renew. I think it's going to take collaboration. It's going to take people willing to sit down across from the table and work things out. But I would argue that the problems are too big for us not to do that.
All right. We're going to move now to the audience questions. I'm a big fan of democracy, so we're just going to go first with the one that got the most votes. What legislative changes, in addition to the ones you folks have already talked about, are needed to support the growth of clean energy in Wisconsin? Sarah, do you want to start us off? I have a feeling I know what your answer is.
Yeah, I mean, again, single issue person here. I think there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of things that are being, considered. I guess, in addition to community solar, which I really encourage you all to support, look into that legislation, talk to your legislator, think about how that could impact you and your businesses. I think there really is a humongous opportunity here, and the legislators need to hear about that. I think we also have to be careful maybe about legislation that gets in the way of this too. I think that there's a lot of frustration on, we talked about it earlier, 6 bills got introduced on local or citing opposition for large projects. I think that's something that we have to consider really carefully. I think I don't work in the utility scale space, but I know, what a sort of headache that would be, to kind of deal with that. But I think there's also some frustration. I hear it from a lot of folks who are excited about community solar. They like the local element and giving people a local say. But I think there's going to be a need to balance that. But certainly we can't be passing legislation that slows down the energy transition. So I think there's going to have to be thoughtful approaches to that this session.
Me? Okay. Well, for the issues that I've been talking about, we don't actually, the legislature could certainly jump in, and maybe they would be interested in doing that. They don't need to. I think the Public Service Commission has a lot of authority in its own right to do to make some of these reforms and help people with paying their rates, but also increasing access to renewable. They can do it through rate cases. They can do it through on a case-by-case basis with these individual waiver requests. They can do it through other specialized dockets that they open just to consider these issues. They can do it through rulemaking, and in fact, there is a rulemaking going on right now on multifamily metering. And getting back to the original question about the maps and things that have changed, one other thing that has changed is that the Wisconsin Supreme Court is taking up issues about the legislature's power to control agencies through withholding funds. That was addressed pretty recently on a case about the Knowles-Nelson Stewardship Fund, and the court said you can't hold back money that's been allocated by the legislature on by the Joint Finance Committee, I think it was in that case. There's one right now pending about the power of the legislature to suspend rules that administrative agencies has passed. So for the things I've been talking about, we don't necessarily need legislative involvement. The commission has very broadly written authority, and the courts have recognized that.
We have a question in here just for you, Dan. So
Oh,
I'm
just
going
for me,
to
okay.
just for you. The audience would like you to explain this billion-dollar mistake in more detail, how it came about and how we fix it.
Yes. Well, it's interesting about the utility industry. They come up with these big, long words that describe a situation. So integrated resource plan, right? What does that mean to the average person? What it means is you have a plan, and it's based on sound economics, and it's based on reliability, and it's based on all of the above strategy. So the issue in particular that I'm referring to is what's called stranded assets. So, I'll just use an example of a decision I was involved in. So utility came to the commission, and they wanted authority to build a new coal plant. This was early in the 2000s, and when you looked at the reliability challenge we had with the lights literally every summer flickering, I approved a coal plant. Hindsight's always 20/20, but I would say, given the circumstances at the time, that was the right decision. But some of those coal plants are now in line to be retired. And so the decision we made in the early 2000s was for an asset that would be around for 30, 40, 50 years. And that those costs would be covered over that time period. And what we're seeing is, because of the economics of renewable, because of our carbon strategy as a state and as a country, these plants are being retired before their useful life is over. But there are costs that are in those plants that still need to be recovered. And so what we have in this situation in this state right now, which is why I think it's a mistake, is we are investing in new renewables. We just heard Sam earlier today talk about the significant investments that are being made every year in the state, which we support and agree with. We've heard about new transmission projects that we support and we think are part of the solution going forward. And so ratepayers are being asked to pay for those investments as they are approved by the commission. But then we have these costs associated with our mistakes that still need to be recovered. So the plant is retired, but ratepayers are still paying for it. That's why I consider it a mistake.
All right, we're over time, but I have one more question from the audience that I would like to ask. How do the new Wisconsin maps and redistricting and any promise they may have for renewable energy become countered by the current administration in Washington?
Yeah, right.
We're being positive here. That's the word of the day.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, look, just really quick. I think everyone's talking about the potential. Oh, sorry if you guys can't hear me. I think everyone is talking about the potential for significant changes to the Inflation Reduction Act. I founded my company on the heels of a lot of excitement and enthusiasm and all the new opportunities that were created out of the Inflation Reduction Act. So definitely feeling the heat a little bit myself, and the potential and changes and ways that could change economics for these projects. I think the most important thing, and I hope that if anyone from Washington is listening into this very exciting conference, I hope that they know yanking the plug on, I don't even want to call it incentives because it's just balancing the playing field, but the marketplace and opportunities for renewables and pulling the rug out from under tons of investment. I mean, think about all the domestic manufacturing that's been started in the U.S. as a result of incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act. I think we're all hopeful. I think a lot of the benefits and dollars and investments have gone into Republican states and Republican districts, and that's an opportunity. I think we're hopeful that they will preserve and realize that if they're going to change things about the Inflation Reduction Act, they can't just wholesale change it. The disruption that would cause and the loss of opportunity and reversal of the opportunities that are being created, I think are significant. So I'm hopeful. People are saying they're going to use a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer, to change incentives. And I'm hopeful that shouldn't change much for what we're talking about in the opportunities today.
And for my issues, again, they don't really invoke much federal power. This is, again, a state issue, a local issue. The only thing it might change is if there's less availability for funding for rooftop solar on a housing development, for example, because it's a federal funded project or something like that, that could be an issue. But I sure hope not. I was very inspired last year at the conference when there was a presentation from the group in River Falls that did the 1300 project, and the video that was, I think it's still online, and it's just, people were so happy to be living there and have these renewables and see it every day, and barely being paid anything for utilities. So fingers crossed that things like that can continue.
And I would just say, I'm a glasses half full guy, so I'm always going to be thinking about, to your theme of the day. If I am a legislator, I recognize that the new maps have changed the landscape. It hasn't changed the specific result just yet, but much closer majorities. I have heard experts on the legislature say that the Senate will be very complicated, given the split in Republicans in the Senate. So I'm not Pollyannish. I'm not saying we're going to have a big omnibus clean energy bill that moves. But consistent with what I said earlier, there are some challenges that we need to address. And I think that can be bipartisan, and I think we can sit down and talk to any legislator who's Republican or Democrat and talk about the importance of making progress.
Thank you all so much. Please, a big round of applause for all of our panelists today.